to this additional council meeting scheduled for the purposes of deliberation on the Freedom Camping bylaw and also on the Whakatū Nelson climate change strategy. I'm going to begin with a karakia, tuia karanga, tuia kararo, tuia kawaho, tuia karoto, tuia tihi tangata, karonga te pau, karonga te ao, humie huie, taikie. We have no apologies, but just for colleagues, both in terms of order of business, during Nigel Philpotter's at LGNZ and Chief Executive's meeting in Wellington. So Andrew is going to join me through the item on the Freedom Camping bylaw, and then Nikki MacDonald will join me with respect to the climate change strategy. I don't intend to make any changes to the order of business. I'm hoping that this will not take as long as the day. I see it as relatively straightforward. Would like to work through the Freedom Camping bylaw and then take a break and then reconvene to do the climate change strategy. And I'm hoping that they will not take more than an hour each. The first item on the agenda is to confirm the meetings of the 21st of May. This was the meeting of which we heard submissions on both the Freedom Camping bylaw and the climate change strategy. Is a colleague prepared to move the adoption of those minutes?
I'll do that.
Thank you, Councillor Courtney, seconded by Councillor Sanson. Is there any discussion on the record of our meeting? That being the case, I shall put those. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, say no. That is carried. We come to page 8 of the agenda and invite Susan and one other members of the team to assist us on the paper with respect to deliberation on the Freedom Camping bylaw. Thank you both for your work. I have been amazed at the quality of the data and the specificity of the advice as we've worked through the Freedom Camping bylaw, and that continues with your latest piece of work for us and is appreciated by elected members. Andrew, did you want to make any opening comments or hand it straight over to Susan and Paul?
Thanks, Mayor Nick. No, I'm quite happy to hand over to Susan and Paul, who've done a huge amount of work on this through this latest phase, but we're getting towards the end of this process, which will be great and prepare us well for the next few years. And I'll hand over to Susan and Paul.
In your good hands.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Kia ora koutou. I'll just do a brief introduction and then we are very happy to take questions. The draft bylaw was consulted on from the 7th of April into the 7th of May, with 56 submissions being received. 4 submitters spoke to the hearing on the 21st of May. This report provides some analysis and recommendations in response to the feedback received. The report groups and discusses the submissions by topic and area and provides officer comment on each matter, which we will take as read rather than speaking to individually. No significant changes are recommended as a result of the submissions, and the changes that are recommended don't seek to add or remove any prohibited or restricted areas. And I do have a few updates prior to moving to questions. With section 12 of the report, please note that all 3 options in the options section should start with recommend rather than adopt. So, for example, the option 1 heading should read, recommend the draft bylaw without amendment. I do apologise for that. Paragraph 9.6. With regards to the separation of vehicles to avoid risk associated with LPG, we have actually not yet received a response from the Plumbers, Fitters and Drain Layer Board regarding the risk associated with camping vehicles. However, we have undertaken some research, and the risk is considered to be less now than it was 10 years ago, as the vehicles are checked to ensure that they're compliant with all regulations. And the commencement date. The report suggested that would have a commencement date of 1st of December with confirmation at the 3rd of July meeting. And the bylaw currently states the 1st of September. So these dates have been reviewed, and it's actually recommended that we have the commencement date of the 1st of October. This will provide staff with a 3-month window to undertake a signage audit and then design, make and install all the necessary signage. It will also enable us to undertake the road markings work that's required to ensure that those road markings are aligned with the provisions of the bylaw. Also, the 1st of October commencement date is in time for the summer season. The report also recommends 3 minor changes to the bylaw as outlined in section 11 of the report, as well as some minor corrections to improve clarity and accuracy. And Paul and I are very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Can I just backtrack slightly? I overlooked an apology that had come through to me on WhatsApp by Councillor Kahu Pakipaki. I would like to move from the chair the acceptance of that apology, seconded by Councillor Sanson. If there is no difficulty, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, say no. My apologies to Kahu for not doing it at the correct time. Now, open for questions. Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Kia ora, Susan and Paul. Thanks very much for the really fulsome report. I'm just curious, really, around the QE2 Gardens site. Took me a while to locate that, but versus the Kinsit Terrace car park. Some of the reasons for restricting camping at Kinsit Terrace car park is safety in terms of people entering and exiting that site and that kind of thing. Whereas Q2 Gardens would seem to me to present a greater safety risk. So I just wonder why there's kind of a slanting towards removing or, I guess, freedom camping or responsible camping at Kinsit Terrace versus QE2 Drive Gardens. And, and whether there was consideration for safety factors. Like I can imagine if you're coming out of that and crossing the highway to go back into Nelson, or running across, potentially people run across the highway to go to the toilet facilities, which I know they're not meant to, but that's human behaviour. I'm just curious about what consideration was given to safety factors.
Sure. Through the Mayor. Yeah, you are correct. There is an element of risk crossing the road at QE2 Drive Gardens, and that's been sort of noted as an orange in the site assessments. I think the main difference is that there's a roundabout at one, and there is a straight bit of road at the other one, and it's just on the cusp of where the speed limit changes. The other aspect to the access at Kinsit is around the walking route under the bridge, which is quite dark, has really poor safety outcomes, and can be quite unattractive and at times dangerous. QE2 Drive Gardens was also recommended not to be included because of the potential risk to people visiting there as well from some of the activity that happens. So it's not just the access, and that's not something that we've noted happens at QE2 Drive Gardens.
The Queen's Elizabeth Garden ones that Councillor Sanson has raised is one of those that, subject to others' opinion, was one of the ones where I was on the margin as to whether we should allow it or not. I note that we received 5 submissions that wanted it to remove from a freedom camping site. One of my concerns, Paul, is there any risk that in prohibiting freedom camping on the Kinsit Terrace site that we're just going to move the problems from Kinsit Terrace to the QE2 site?
I don't think so, because the problems are quite different in nature. And also we need to look at the way we can prohibit things under the law. And some of the submissions are really about the amenity as you drive past and those sorts of aspects, which are quite challengeable, I think, under the law. I'd also note that QE2 Drive Gardens is our most popular site. And I think there were submissions in support of it as well. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It is a judgment, but my recommendation would be to keep QE2 Drive Gardens.
Is there any further questions on that QE2 site? To be clear to colleagues, today's is a deliberations, and then we're going to bring forward for our July meeting. And at that time, would like to facilitate a proper debate in which people can express their broader views. I see today's discussions and deliberations as to finalise the bylaw so that our officers can prepare those papers for the July meeting. And so I think it would be helpful if there was a question mark on any of the sites where we wanted to move away from officers' recommendation to be able to provide a bit of a steer around that as we work the issues through. Councillor Sanson?
Thanks. Just a really brief comment, if I may, to clarify my questioning on that.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to
Yeah.
have some questions. Like you say,
So I think
pretty informal.
I wasn't particularly, I guess, inferring that we should be restricting camping there. I was just wanting to understand why we're restricting at Kinzit Terrace when on safety, when QE2 Gardens, I felt also presented similar issues, but I'm comfortable to keep the QE2 Gardens site in. I think because it's really open, it probably prevents some of the less unsafe behaviour of people in the area. But
Helpful to have that clarification. Has there been, and I note under 8.25, Paul, on the QE2 Gardens site, this is something that will be further discussed with the New Zealand Transport Agency. Do we have any indication from them on their view on Kinzit and the QE2 sites as to whether they have a preference for freedom camping being allowed there or not, consistent with some of the questions that Councillor Sanson asked about the road safety dimension?
The only real conversation I've had with NZTA is around QE2 Drive Gardens, and they were supportive of it being a freedom camping area.
Yep.
I haven't had a conversation with them about Kinzit Terrace.
My personal preference would be for QE2 Drive Gardens to be included in the exclusion, but unless I hear otherwise from colleagues, I think it's unless others have a similar view, we'll stick with the officer's recommendation. Councillor Benj?
Thank you, Nick. I understood we had problems at Kinzit Terrace with rubbish and mess and people going to the toilet in the bushes and the rest of it. I understood from, if my memory serves me right, that it was more about homeless and people sleeping in cars than people in camper vans. Was that, am I right in recalling that or not?
That is an issue at Kinzit Terrace, far more than it is at QE2 Drive Gardens, but it's not something we can consider under this bylaw. But yes, it is an issue. The effects that we've considered under this bylaw are that some of those behaviours impacting freedom campers and their safety.
So you're going to ban freedom camping in order to fix the other issue?
But we're recommending that freedom camping at Kinzit Terrace be prohibited because, and you might see in the attachment some of the comments, some of the visitors that have come and stayed there have felt quite unsafe, and many have actually left in the early hours of the morning. So that's one of the reasons. There are other reasons as well around the access, health and safety.
And you say it's unsafe to walk around under the bridge. Have there been, I mean, is this a perception or has there been actual?
I couldn't answer that, to be honest, but I've had advice from other parts of the council that look after the social aspects, that it is quite unsafe at times. There's very poor lighting, and it's from a septic point of view, it's very bad.
Remind us, Paul, which is the site
This is the route
that we've had the greatest number of complaints? Would Kinzit Terrace be it? Or of the three sites that we're specifically removing is ISIL, Kinzit, Maitai Cricket Ground. Which one have officers received the most complaints about?
I believe it's Maitai Cricket Ground and then Kinzit.
Then Kinzit, so it's number two.
I'd have to
Matthew.
confirm that. Yeah. Yeah, but different reasons.
So just to crystallise that point, officers' recommendation is that QE2 Drive Garden remains open to freedom camping, albeit it will be restricted to those that are self-contained. Does anybody wish to further raise any questions on that, or we'll be sticking with the officer recommendation? Councillor Courtney?
Well, you're tempting me now because I do have a bit of I have a concern about that. Simply because, and I know you say it in your very thorough report, thank you very much for it, Susan and Paul, but I would say a large number of Nelsonians feel, and it's in the report, I know, but it is a large number that feel it distracts from the entrance to our city. It's a distraction. It's not a good look is the main word that comes through to me, and I've got to express it here. I really do. And I know you've looked at it, and I respect you both and your judgments on this, but that's the feeling, and please believe me, from the community on that one. So I'll just leave it there.
Thanks,
Right?
Councillor.
I have another matter to raise, but that's.
Councillor Rollo.
Thanks, Nick. I think I'm with Councillor Courtney on this one. Would be quite concerned if we are leaving Kiwi2 Drive. The thing I've personally experienced down there is if you go there about 9 o'clock at night and you turn the headlights on, there seems to be more cars than you can actually see. And so I think some of the concerns we get from people, especially in that area of the town that see Kinsit Terrace as an issue, also see Kiwi2 as an issue. And so I would be more than happy to consider removing that as a site.
Paul, would you give an estimate? In my view, around this freedom camping issue, we've effectively got three groups. One is the sort of the group of what I call Kiwi nomads. These are the people that are members of the Motor Caravan Association. They sometimes have motor caravans that are worth more than my home. You've then sort of got the international group, and some of those are in the commercial campers, and some of them are in cheap second-hand vans and cars that have make-believe self-containment. When I've been to that QE2 site, it sort of looks about 50-50 between those that have got the self-contained and those that are don't have adequate containment facilities. Do officers have any perceptions of that?
What I think one thing that's important to consider is that it is going to change as we move forward, because the new regulations will be, the hammer comes down June next year, and after that time, you will be able to look up, well, you can now, you can look on the register to see if a number plate corresponds with a green sticker on the online register. And so those smaller vehicles are going to be much harder and more expensive to have certified. So I think that we'll find that there will be more and more of those bigger motorhomes using those spaces. And so that would be my view.
I think my follow-up on that is one of the reasons I really like your recommendations in the report, and that is to provide for the freedom camping on the Buxton and Montgomery and Wakatu Square sites, because I'm really satisfied we can enforce in those areas, and actually I don't get a lot of complaints about enforcement right now. If we allow freedom camping on QE2 Drive, and we're going to have this issue about who's really got self-containment and not, we've got the assistance of the government regulations coming into effect next June. How confident are you with the resources we've set aside in the annual plan? I think we'll put about 40,000 into enforcement, that you're actually going to be able to enforce the self-containment rules on this QE2 site?
I think it's achievable, especially with the other areas that have come out. So that we have already reduced the amount of areas that will need to be enforced. The message will get out amongst the travelling community as well that this is happening, the enforcement. And the other thing I'd just add is that longer vehicles aren't as suitable in the car parks, and this QE2 Drive Garden site does provide an opportunity for them. And the other thing I'd add is there is a review in 5 years of the bylaw. So any decisions that are made through this process will get a 5-year review. And that's part of the reason we went with the recommendation for Kinsit Terrace. It was just, let's pause it from there for 5 minutes, see what 5 years and see what the situation's like when we come to the review.
I think you put a good case, and I think you've persuaded me. The fact that they're bigger vehicles, the fact that we've got the new regulations coming into effect next June, the fact that you're actually going to be able to focus your enforcement on a smaller number of sites. But I think it will be if I'm privileged to still be here in 5 years, we'll be see how it goes. Of all the sites, this was the only one that I was a bit on the margin. So unless there's an alternative view, we're going to stick with the officer's recommendation on that site. I think the best way for us to work this through, are there any questions on any other sites where colleagues might want to go one way or the other? Councillor Courtney?
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Susan and Paul, can you just elaborate more on your considerations regarding Atkinson Street, please? I'm a regular walker down there. I won't exaggerate and say every week, but I'd like to. In fact, I will. I'll say regularly, just about every week. And when the fish are running, there's real frustration with the fishers that go down to the sea to fish, and they can't get a park at certain times, and particularly over the summer period. So I really would appreciate hearing from you the thought you've given to this, because while I am comfortable with your report, I just feel that needs a watching brief over it, because I think it's going to build over time, and that's an asset down there that we're trying to develop and attract as many people as we can down there, and this could just mar that goal we've got, that plan, that dream of doing something really special with the marina.
Yeah, through the mayor, we did work quite closely with Nigel from the well, we had meetings with Nigel through this process, and we have recommended through the original bylaw that Atkinson Street and the marina area is prohibited, and that don't think there were any submissions in opposition to that. I would just qualify that though, that this is a freedom camping bylaw, and people that are down that area living in cars or without a home, this does not regulate that.
You're going to police regularly, and
Sure, we've got budgeting for enforcement. So, and Rayno's here as well if you've got specific questions around enforcement. But yes, if there'll be two types. I imagine there'll be two types of enforcement: regular patrols and on the back of phone calls.
One of the questions I had under 6.18 on the signage was that you have noted in the report that there will need to be signage put up. My question is this: there are a number of areas that freedom camping is currently allowed, and we're going to be taking it away. And signage there will be quite important because you've got to change people. There are other areas that Councillor Courtney has raised, like in Atkinson Street, where actually it's not necessarily loud, it's just silent. Can you just give me a bit more flavour to your plans around signage? And also with the recommendation that the bylaw comes into effect on the 1st of October, are you logistically going to be able to get the signage in place by that preferred date? I love the date because it feels like the natural beginning of summer, but just keen to understand a little bit more about what you've covered in signage under 6.18 and 6.19 in your report.
Sure. The plan for signage is to do a bit of an audit of what we've got now. I would imagine most of it will come out and be replaced, and I would like to do a whole network review of the whole area. So there may be even signage before you even get to a site. For example, if there's not going to be any freedom camping beyond State Highway 6 at Cable Bay Drive, we might put a sign as you turn off saying there's no freedom camping beyond this point. So we want to be really clear, and that's going to be in cahoots with a lot of online stuff as well. We'll talk to Campermate and have a lot of social media about the changes. So there should be by the time the 1st of October comes around, there shouldn't be a lot of confusion for users, and I don't think there's any issue with getting the signage out in that time.
Is it possible to include on the signage the fact that the council provides reserve land at Brook, at Maitai and at Te Hananui, particularly when we've just invested $1.8 million up the Maitai to improve that campground from, I think it's 80 to 400 spaces? Is it possible? Freedom camping is prohibited here. You are invited to camp on council reserves at Te Hananui Holiday Park, Maitai Reserve, etc. Are you able to put that on the signage?
Absolutely. And just writing a note there. Some of our conversations with iwi have raised the same thing. Can we have a map showing the other freedom camping sites? Can we have the Tiaki promise? Can we show that the Superloos over there? So I think the signage, there's a real opportunity there to direct people and have a real welcoming message.
The other part that I'm quite open to is you might need some temporary signage as we shift the dial, and some of those may not need to be permanent signs once we get the significant shift that this policy proposes. Councillor Benj.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. I like your idea about the signage. I think I've lived in a house bus in Australia for 6 months, and as you're always going to somewhere new, you have no idea really where you can go, especially in, you know, the less populated areas. So I like that idea, but I just want to, we're all talking about freedom camping, and that's not what this is it? We can't put freedom camping on a sign. This is responsible camping. We've got rid of the word freedom for that very reason. And I think I struggle with this whole thing, having lived in a bus, because freedom is gone. And that's the reality that I struggle with. The freedom to do the things you used to do. Even it's the same in Australia. When I went there as a kid, there were places that trucks pulled up and spent the night and lit a fire and sat round, and it's illegal just to pull over in a self-contained bus and stay there the night now. The trucks are gone, but freedom is gone. So we do need, whatever we call it and whatever we say, we've got to stop using that word freedom.
I'll take the councillor's advice. I wanted to finalise any discussion on specific sites that councillors wanted to raise. We've had a good discussion about the QE2 site. Are there any councillors that want to raise? We've got extensive maps before us in the schedules. Happy to have a sort of a site-specific discussion, and then I'd like to move on to the general bylaw. So, Councillor Anderson.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Nick. It's a good report, and Kinzer, you explained it really well to me, and I can handle that. The only one I was wondering about was Cable Bay. It's a good report. Just 7.25, just a little bit more information. Could you explain? Mentions observed environmental impacts from freedom camping as observed from the campground operators. What? Could you just explain that? What does that mean?
Yeah, sure. That's just correspondence we've had over years from the campground operator around people leaving rubbish behind and things blowing into the estuary and that sort of thing. The actual legal road is a curious one at Cable Bay. It actually, quite a big chunk of the legal road covers the estuary. So that's why we felt that was worthy of protection in particular.
My position, Matty, on Cable Bay is in a strict legal sense, we're not allowed to take into account the fact that there is a campground there in our decision to prohibit freedom camping in that area. I accept that legal advice. At a common sense perspective, though, we put the Cable Bay campground operation, which is very small and very marginal, to huge expense to build good shower and toilet facilities. And then we say people can park right next door and effectively use those because it's possible to enforce. And that just doesn't feel right. But I'm with the officer's recommendation and think what we've got right at Cable Bay. I've been at Cable Bay when many swimmers and surfers are frustrated that the space that should really there be for people to be able to enjoy it as a day facility is taken up by unresponsible campers. To pick up Councillor Benja's point. All right, if there's no further site discussion, the only other place I'd like to go is, since we had our submissions, I note that the Tasman District Council have published their draft freedom camping, their draft responsible camping bylaw. Is there any, as much as possible, I like to see a reasonable alignment between Nelson and Tasman? Has officers given any consideration to what Tasman is proposing, and are there any alignments? What would be your commentary looking next door at Tasman and their rules?
I'll have a go, and you can have a go as well if you like. Look, the timing was difficult between the two councils, so we couldn't align everything, but we certainly have been talking a lot. From 6 months ago, we've been in conversations. I think their bylaw is quite similar to ours if you take a step back and just look at the outputs and the impacts. I think the real key is going to be alignment between the signage and the communications that visitors will see rather than the actual text of the bylaw or the way it's produced. I think the experience for the visitor is probably the important thing. If I were to comment on the differences, I'd say perhaps their bylaw is slightly more enabling for freedom camping, and that's probably because of the scale of the land that they're dealing with. I think we're quite a small region and we've got quite an urban focus. They have a lot, Tasman has a lot bigger areas, so there's some areas there, like in Ngatamoti, I think they've got up to 30 or 40 non-self-contained. That would be difficult, I think, in Nelson. So we've aligned in as much as we can, given the constraints of the different timing of the processes.
For most visitors to our region, they will have no idea that there is an artificial boundary down Champion Road. Is there any opportunity for us to have a shared website or connection with Tasman around visitors to the region and being able to identify where they can lawfully freedom camp? And is there any potential for us to align our signage so that the look and the feel is as similar as possible, so that our comms with those that are visiting the region can easily connect with the new rules?
Yeah, certainly I was really keen to have a conversation with Tasman around the signage and see where we can align and make the messaging consistent. As far as the website goes, it's probably already there with Campermate and Wikicamps. It's if we added another one, I'm not sure how much use it would get, and it would just be something to manage and probably just duplicate.
Thank you. If Councillor Anderson.
Just a couple of quick questions. Brushes for toileting, that's brushing your teeth? It mentions brushes for toileting in the I'm just wondering, is that brushing your teeth? Because it sounds worse than...
Sorry, what paragraph are we on?
What para are we, Matty?
Sorry.
Mind boggles.
A sec. 7.20 Isle Park.
Bushes, shrubbery.
Oh, sorry.
The one R.
There we go. And
what is that? It's the uses of bushes for toileting, not brushes for toileting.
Okay, it is as bad as it sounds. Okay. And just back to signage. So just mentioning you could be going around and updating and replacing. Just wondering about news signs, community artworks. So they brought that up about their signage and would like somewhere possibly none existed. We're looking at chucking up new stuff that's just in the document. It looked like we're just updating existing signs.
Yeah, through the chair, I think it would be replacing most of them. The messaging is quite hard to follow at the moment in the signage, and I think we can do a lot better with making it a bit more welcoming, bilingual.
Yeah, so replacing existing. What I'm wondering about is new sites, putting up new signs, and I'm not sure whether there's anything at Community Artworks, but they did speak to that about getting a sign up.
Sure, yes, we can look at signs that are... Signage wouldn't just be limited to freedom camping areas, it would be in problem areas as well. Yeah.
I was encouraged, Matty, in the discussion with Community Artworks in the last week, that some of the issues with that site that have for a long time been quite troublesome are significantly improved. But there would be an expectation from elected members for our council and their enforcement effort to be really supportive of community arts and continuing to see the improvements. So the feedback I've had is it's getting better in that area, but we still have work to do. Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Nick. Kia ora, Susan and Paul, thanks for the report. The report's got good data on number of vehicles at different sites relative to the allocated spots. In the case that the number of vehicles commonly exceeds the allowed number, is that reason for reconsidering the site, or is it an enforcement issue? So I just asked because if we are saying there are commonly too many cars there, so we're reconsidering the site, then under legislation, in fact, that's not a reason to consider it because it's an enforcement issue. So, and I know some of the data in there were done to compare the numbers available under the 2017 bylaw and now with the new one. But are we saying there are too many cars, so we are reconsidering the site?
Through the chair, no, that's not the direct reason. It's probably more, it depends on, are you specifically talking about Isle Park or a specific site?
Yeah, that's the easy one because I think there are 3 spaces allowed, not to 20 there.
Yeah. No, there's a number of reasons why that site is being recommended, and it's around, the main one is probably around the access, particularly at weekends with Green Meadows Sports Ground next door, and the area being a public garden. Just talking to the number of vehicles that are out there, it has been an enforcement issue, but it's also very difficult when you have an area that's quite a long way from anywhere else. If it's late at night and a vehicle arrives and there's already too many there, the natural thing is that they will stay there. So that's just a side impact really, but it's not a direct reason why this was recommended.
I'm assuming, Paul, that let's say I roll up in my camper van and I go into Buxton Square and it's full and I park on one of the spots that's not there, I get exactly the same ticket. That is, there isn't a difference between effectively staying in a spot that it is allowed but being too many. It's just that I'm not parking in the designated area. So I get exactly the same ticket.
Yes, the line marking will show the perimeter of where you're allowed to Freedom Camp, and if you're outside of that, you're subject to enforcement.
And the intention in those 3 central city campgrounds will be to change those blue lines in time for the enforcement on the 1st of October?
Correct.
And what's the fine in the event that obviously enforcement's going to be a key part when this comes into effect on the 1st of October? What is the scale of the fine I get pinged with if I am illegally parking in a Kinsit, an Isle, or outside the designated area in one of the central city car parks?
I'll just have to look up that. I think it's 400. It's gone up, I think, from 200 to 400. I'll just check with.
That's great. $400?
400.
400, thank you. Councillor Benj?
Can the fine be on the sign? Because if I pull up late and I look, $400, it's $20 to stay in the campground. Maybe I'm going to stay in the campground.
Maybe I'll have a night at Rutherford.
You know, if it's $20, maybe I'll just stay here. I mean, is that? I mean, it makes sense to me, but that doesn't mean it makes sense, as I've found out. So, could it be on the sign, because it's a big part of the decision.
Yeah, there's no reason. Through the chair, there's no reason why I couldn't. And we can look into that.
I'm with Councillor Benj. The $400 would make sure I moved along and would make sure my teenage children moved along. I think it'd be quite motivating. But I think the key thing is that with the signage, we leave it to our staff to make the final decision as to what works best where. But you could take some guidance from some of the comments that have been made by elected members today. There are no further questions. I'm sorry, Councillor Stella.
I mean, I'll just give the opposite view on that one. It just seemed a bit unwelcoming. I appreciate the benefit of helping people to make decisions. I'd rather they're getting that information from the relevant app that they're using than having on a sign saying, welcome, this many spots. If you're too late and don't get a spot, it's $400. It just seems a bit overdone to me.
I think getting that tone right. I'm a little bit in the headspace of love to have so. We love campers in Nelson, and we have fantastic campgrounds. Here they are. This is a prohibited area, and you'll be paying $400. But let's leave it to our staff. I think the tone question that you are correct is that I want those signs to make it plain. That actually we want campers to stay in the right place and doing so responsibly. Councillor Brand.
Thank you. So isn't the fine or infringement notice explanation or what you could be fined up to explain on that app that they go to about where you can Freedom Camp, and if you don't, then you may be open to enforcement or infringement of up to a particular fine? Isn't that all on that information website thing that they go to find out where they are allowed to go and park?
I feel like it, through the chair, I feel like it probably is, but I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry.
Okay. So, yeah, because I sort of get what Councillor Stan's saying, but I also get what Councillor Bench is saying, and I sort of think, well, when you come in through customs to a country visiting, it's on the declaration form, isn't it, that if you don't declare you've got food or blah, 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 you can have fine or prosecuted up to blah, blah, blah. That doesn't say you're not welcome in our country. It's just saying declare
That's
your
right.
stuff.
They,
So
they get the tone correct. Can I just check, is the fine if I claim I am self-contained under the government regulations and I'm not, so I camp in one of the areas that is designated, you check me on the website with my registration plate number, it says I have not got the proper certification by self-containment. Is the $400 fine the same?
I think so. I think it's a fine. Then you're illegally freedom camping, so you'd be infringed. I would imagine so. I'm not 100%, but it would make sense to me.
Okay. Responsible
camping. Yeah.
You'll get to me eventually, Councillor Bench.
The other thing,
I'm a slow learner.
we can also use QR codes on our signage as well, so direct people to another site.
And that's where I think you've got a bit of a job to do. And I think the message of elected members is just getting that balance right. And I think the analogy that Councillor Breen made about international visitors arriving, we love having you in New Zealand, a very warm welcome, but please look after our environment and respect the rules. If we can get that tone right, that'll be a really important part of the message with us. Now, if there is no further questions, it is my intention to move from the chair recommendations from 1 to 4, including the amendment at 4C, which is for the bylaw to come into effect on the 1st of October. I stress that this is a recommendation to full council and the bylaw will be debated at our July council meeting for adoption. Is somebody prepared to second that? Councillor Benj is happy to second that. I'm assuming there are no further questions. Is there any councillors that wish to make any comments prior to me putting the resolutions before us? That being the case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. That is carried. Again, Paul, can I just pass on to you and your team that right from the word go, when you've started this work, the quality of the information, of which is very detailed, site by site, the number of complaints, the information on the government regulations, and helping us get to the sensible point has been nothing short of superb. I've been involved in government regulations that have not had the quality of information, and you're a lot smaller team, and I think you have helped our community get to a really good landing place. Very best wishes as you put together both the signage and the other parts and the enforcement for us in the next stage, which is to both communicate to the community and to get the enforcement aligned with 1st of October. So on behalf of the elected members, Andrew, can I thank you and your team for helping us, with which one of the issues I declared when I first became mayor was a hospital pass, always goes to custard, and it's proved to be a lot more smooth than I was expecting. We're now going to adjourn for 10 minutes. When we resume at 9:55, I'd like to move on and change over to the climate change team. Councillor June. Resumed, we come to item 5.2, which is the Wakatu Nelson Climate Change Strategy on page 58 of our agenda. The purpose today is for us to finalise our deliberations in response to the submissions that we heard in May. Just for councillors' information, the key focus, in my view, for our deliberations today are where the officers have reflected on the submissions and are recommending refinements to it. In the climate change task force led by Councillor Stallard, we had an informal discussion about how we would manage the issue of the targets. The reality is that there are some differences of view, which is entirely appropriate, between the option A and the option B. It is my intention at the July council meeting, when the strategy will come forward, is that will be an item that we will have an open debate as to whether the final strategy will include the community target option A and option B. Now, today, it's entirely appropriate to ask questions that will make sure that the council can make a really well-informed decision on the A and the B, but I'd prefer that we didn't double up on the debate between the option A and B. It's about making sure we are preparing the ground for our council to make a good decision. Can I welcome officers to present their report on our deliberations on the strategy and to then follow through with any questions from colleagues. Nikki, did you want to make any opening comments as the group manager responsible for overseeing this piece of work?
Thank you. I think it is fairly straightforward, the report, so I'm happy just to take it as read and move into questions.
For all the work, you're quite happy just to take report as read, officers, and let us go?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. We're in good hands of elected members. The Deputy Mayor.
Just more of a technical question in terms of deliberations on submissions is why, as part of the deliberations, we're not deliberating on the target for inclusion.
You want me to answer that? The discussion we had at the Climate Change Task Force is that we effectively have these two options that we've gone out to consult on. And the question simply was, where was the best place for the council to make the decision about which of those targets? It was, and I think it was supported by officers, but I'm happy to understand differently, that the best place to do that was at a full council meeting with council officers providing us, well, here's what option A would look like, and here's the pros and cons of it, and here's option B. I also know the Chief Executive had signalled to councillors that sometimes, rather than officers stating a clear preference, that it was appropriate for the governance team to make that call. And so then it was simply a question of timing, whether that was best done today or at the July meeting when we adopt the strategy. The indications was, let's get the questions today so that in making that decision, the report provides all the information that councillors feel they need to make that call. And that was felt to be an easier process, particularly for members that are not on the Climate Change Task Force and may want extra information and time to consider which of those two options they would prefer. So ultimately, if you want to blame somebody, it's me.
Don't worry, I was going to do that anyway.
Councillor Hodgson.
Kia ora. Can I ask, and it might have been, it was probably discussed in the task force, that maybe for staff to comment or members of the task force, what consideration was given to aligning the targets to the Zero Carbon Act and updating them as those targets change over time?
Yeah, so option A is of the two target options is the option that is aligned with government's emissions targets and emissions budgets. So that option is presented, and option B is the alternative, which is the more ambitious and steeper pathway.
under option A, is it proposed that if the government targets shift, that our target would shift with it, or would our target remain the same regardless of what happens at a national policy level?
So option A is largely based on the government's emissions budgets, which have already been set for the first three emissions 5-year periods. So that's all governed by the Climate Change Response Act, and it was amended by the Zero Carbon Act of 2019. And there are very strict rules around when a successive government can challenge those. So it has to be pretty extreme circumstances for the government's emissions budgets to be challenged. However, the principal legislation can be reviewed, and I understand that there is an intention from the current government to reconsider the biogenic methane section of the two targets in the Zero Carbon Act. So that would have to be done through a legislative amendment. To answer your question, we haven't explicitly stated that, but it would make sense for, if we do adopt option A, to reconsider our targets to make sure they're aligned with government's targets if there was an amendment to the principal legislation.
Can I just ask a quick sup off the back of Councillor Hodgson's question? You've got Climate Change Commission and the government under the Zero Carbon Act regularly reviewing its targets and the progress it makes. How do you see the mechanism operating between our strategy and the Climate Change Commission's national strategy in the way in which those reviews will interact? So do we say anything in our strategy at the time, so let's say in 2 years' time, Climate Change Commission moves the goalpost from here to here, do we have a interconnected mechanism for us reviewing our own?
We don't currently, but we could build it in. Yeah, as I said though, once the government's emissions budgets are set, there's limited scope to revise those. The instrument that will change significantly between different governments is the emissions reduction plan. So those are the policies that the government has committed to achieve emissions reductions, and we've seen between the change in central government a massive shift in priorities and how they're intending to challenge how they're intending to achieve the emissions budgets. And just as an aside, the Lawyers for Climate Action have recently filed proceedings to challenge the government's emissions reduction plan. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Can I just check the technical advice? Under the New Zealand Climate Change Commission, what is their periods that they are currently working to? And I want to test as to how they align with our 2025 to 2035. So they're working on 5-year national emission reduction programs. What are the dates of those, please?
So the first 3 emissions budgets have been set. So the first one for the period, was it 2022 to 2025 was a 4-year period, and then the next 2 are 5-year periods. So the government sets 3 emissions budgets based on the Climate Change Commission's recommendations at one time. The Climate Change Commission produces their advice to government to advise on the on the emissions reduction budgets. It's usually about a year or 2 before those emissions budgets are set, and then the emissions budgets are set at the beginning of that period. From memory, I need to go back to the legislation, but the first emissions budget period is pretty much set in stone. But the Climate Change Commission has scope to kind of advise on the next 2 to make sure that those are still the sensible pathways for government to aim for. So the immediate emissions budgets is less contestable than the successive 2.
I understand that, but as I understand it, the central government national targets are for 20 to 25, then 2025 to 2030, and then 2030 to 35. Picking up on the question that Councillor Hodgson has raised, would it make sense in our strategy to quite explicitly state that it is our intention to review our targets when whomever is government reviews their target for the 2030 to 2035? In other words, to flag that in our 10-year program, we would relook at those targets. I'm interested in it, but I'd be interested picking up from Councillor Hodgson. I think the alignment with the work of the National Climate Change Commission makes some sense. I'd be interested to know firstly what officers' view would be about including in our strategy some language of that sort, and then I'd like to test it with colleagues.
Yep.
Officers?
I think that's a really good idea. So if option A is adopted, we could build that in and specify the periods for when our own target would be reviewed.
I mean, potentially even if option B was adopted and if central government's target became, over time the science kind of points that it needs to shift and central government have an even more aspirational target, I would hope that we would automatically align ourselves with that under A or B.
I'm with James, and that is regardless of whether the council chooses option A or B, and I don't want to preempt. It may be a government that tightens the targets, makes them more ambitious or lesser. I just think for us to be adjusting at about 5-year intervals our approach. Councillor Sanson, welcome views or questions.
My understanding first of all, thanks for the great report and all the work that sits in behind it from yourselves and from the community. My understanding was that we were going to be reviewing the climate strategy every 3 years. So wouldn't reviewing the targets be a part of that or not? I would be interested.
The intention was to review the climate action plan every 3 years to check that the climate action plan is working towards the goals in the strategy, and that would follow the adoption of the LTP. However, we haven't built in a mechanism for reviewing the strategy itself. We were hoping that the strategy would be largely a kind of enduring document with the, I guess, caveat that we've just talked about around changes to government targets.
Could I just tease out from officers in response to Councillor Sance's question, would officers prefer that the targets be reviewed 3 yearly aligned with the action plan or 5 yearly with respect to the Climate Change Commission's review of theirs?
I think 5 yearly would be the preference because particularly if the climate change strategy is and the targets are set to align with government targets, then it would make sense to do a 5-year review in line with that timeline.
Can we resolve that question? I'm particularly interested in the views of the chair of the Climate Change Task Force. Aaron, do you have any view about this review?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our option A, the overarching legislation is to the Climate Change Response Act, so that net zero 2050. And then the approach is to set every 5 years emission budgets, so just the amount, and then following up from that emission reduction plans to achieve the budgets. And those budgets and plans are not necessarily revised, they are set for the 5 years, and then later there's the next 5, so the 2035 to 2040 period will be proposed. But I don't think the Climate Change Commission is every now and again revisiting existing budgets and plans that they recommend.
Can we just check officers' advice on that? My understanding, and you may well be right, Councillor Stallard, was that my thought was 25 to 30 is locked in, but 2030 to 35, which covers the period of our strategy, is due to be revisited about 28, 29. What's officers' understanding?
That's my understanding too.
So come back to that, Councillor. I'm genuinely open-minded about this, but I'd be interested in your views as to whether you would be comfortable with the report saying that for the 2030 to 35 period, that we would expect to review the strategy in line with the timing of the Climate Change Commission.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it may be tightening it up, it may be loosening it. We don't know who the government will be in 28, 29, but I do think it's a relevant consideration for our work fitting in as closely as possible with the New Zealand Climate Change Commission.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And it's right to tie it to the Commission rather than the ultimate political decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agree.
So can you find some language? Have you got enough guidance there from the comments from Councillor Hodgson, Sanson, Stallard and myself to be able to put a review around that 5-year frame?
Yes, yeah, we can build that into the 3rd of July report.
Thank Councillor Hodgson for raising it. Are you quite satisfied that that's a good solution to it? I now take Councillor Stallard, then I'll come to the Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Minik. And yeah, and partly following on from Councillor Hodgson's question or point, and also page 65 in the report, I think it's important that we state whenever we're comparing the two options in relation to government targets that they are both being adopted by the government. which sounds odd, but it's true. One is sort of that option A under legislation, and that's been in place for some time. And then under the Paris Agreement, there's been an encouragement for governments to up their ambition and contribution, and what's come from that is our contribution, which is basically the option B target, and that's also been adopted by the government. So I think if you think that is the case, if we could just state that consistently throughout our documents, because sometimes we seem to say option A is consistent with government direction and not option B, whereas I think they are both, have both been adopted by the government. So we are in alignment if we go with either of them. Any comments on that? Have I got it right? Wrong?
Well, yes, and that the option, the Climate Change Response Act, the purpose of the Act is to align New Zealand's response with the 1.5 degree Paris goal. However, there has been some challenge as to whether the government's emissions budgets in fact align with that pathway. So option A is aligned with the principle, is aligned with government's emissions budgets, but we can't confidently say that it's aligned with the purpose of the legislation.
I think the key thing for us is when you provide the report for council to debate the merits and otherwise of option A and option B, is just to provide the best advice officers can about their alignment. And that is what's aligned to Paris, what's aligned to the Climate Change Commission and the government's report. So it's a absolutely valid thing, and what we're asking for as elected officials is best quality advice around the relative alignment of option A and option B to the government's targets and to the Paris targets. So I'm supportive of what Councillor Stellard's saying. We just want to have good, clear advice around both those options. Councillor Stellard.
Yeah, just one final comment. Recommendation 3. Look, I agree completely that the next long-term plan is really critical for the implementing of this strategy, but I'd be concerned if this is giving and signalling that we won't consider, if some opportunity arose, something via the 26-27 annual plan. So just wanting to question, what is the intention of recommendation 3? Is it saying nothing until the long-term plan, or does it still leave open initiatives if the opportunity arrives in the 26-27 annual plan?
Nikki?
Through the Mayor, you know that certainly if elected members see an opportunity and want to include it in the next annual plan, that's a possibility. The big focus will be building this into the activity management plans, which is going to result in a long-term plan.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, then myself, then Councillor Courtney.
Just in terms of the council emission reduction targets, is in breaking them down into transport and energy, waste and wastewater, are there activities that council carries out that won't be captured by those targets? And do we have an overarching emission reduction target for the organisation itself?
Yes. Yeah. So we're proposing to set a target for transport and energy, and then as we've previously explained, there's a target set through the Joint Waste Minimisation and Management Plan for waste. What's not included is wastewater at the moment. We don't have any target for wastewater. Is there anything else? No, so it's just wastewater that would be excluded.
Can I check the wastewater emissions predominantly methane or CO2?
Sorry, methane, predominantly methane, yes.
And the rationale for not setting a target around the methane emissions from wastewater is we don't have enough knowledge about what technologies are available for us to do so.
Exactly.
What happens if in the course of developing our activity management plans, we do find there is technology? How do you see that flowing into the strategy and action plans?
I guess we could reconsider our council target again if there's new technology that comes in for wastewater, or we could set a specific wastewater.
The wording in the strategy is if solutions become available, council will consider setting a target for reducing wastewater emissions.
The question I've got is when we come to the action plan, we've set these different targets across these different types of emissions, transport, energy and waste. Let's say we come across a technology that gives super bangs for bucks. So for instance, our council's had the experience with the landfill where we've achieved extraordinary reductions in emissions at relatively low cost. If we find a technology that is economically viable to significantly reduce the methane emissions, and it's far more economic than the things in our energy and transport, how do we handle that? Because in my view, the overall goal here is how do we get emissions down at the least cost?
Yeah, well, I guess. Do you have a response to that? We can review the targets at any.
We can review the
stage.
targets if we get it. How
new
likely is that?
technology
Are there if we talk to our wastewater team, are they seeing any magical ways of which we can reduce those methane emissions at the moment?
No, that they're not at this stage, which is why we.
And one of the reasons why you put in there is there isn't anything on the horizon that gives us great hope that we're going to find a landfill gas equivalent in the wastewater scheme. Councillor Sanson, then back to the Deputy Mayor.
Can I just continue my question, which was that hasn't, so what is my point there was that we directly address transport and energy, waste and wastewater in the strategy, even if there's not there's just targets for transport and energy. Are there other significant council activities that as a result of adopting these, or just council activities that as a result of adopting these as the sort of the only targets as opposed to an overarching organisational target that we will be failing to account for? So like does things like, you know, the embodied emissions of flood protection works or new builds, are we capturing these within our, is that under energy use?
Sure. So this is an council operational emission. So it's usually electricity, fuel consumption. All the embodied emissions is not included in the council operational footprint emissions. So embodied emissions won't be included.
All right, and there's no other significant activities that aren't captured by transport and energy?
No.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Bennett. In terms of wastewater, and I am aware that there are councils around the country that are utilising technology that deal with their wastewater in a way that captures the emissions. And I'm also aware that there is an organisation that has plans to build a trial, one of those out on Bell Island. So we are aware of technology. They've presented at council. You know, I mean, we might not decide that that's the one for us, but there are already solutions being utilised by other councils. So why wouldn't we set a goal for our emissions reduction from wastewater? Because surely that would set some kind of imperative or guidance that we intend to focus on those emissions and do something about them. Cheers.
So we have been in contact with most of the country wastewater treatment plant colleagues in Christchurch, in Auckland. This is a national challenge. And you're right, there are things that we could do. We can build a biodigester, we can build, but the price of that investment compared with the reduction that we will get is so high that it won't be feasible. You will be paying thousands of dollars for just 1 kilogram of CO2 or nitrous oxide reduce. Yeah.
Councillor Sanson?
My understanding is that there are kind of, I guess, privately owned initiatives that are prepared to make that investment because for whatever reason, they see that it's financially beneficial to invest in it and that we wouldn't necessarily have to do that investment. Like it could just be that we are offloading our sludge or, you know, diverting sludge. I mean, I'm just curious because if you've got kind of diversion of sludge to Rabbit Island onto the trees, which I understand is great for the trees, but it's also not, you know, the methane's just out into the air and there's also, I guess, potential contamination of seawater or groundwater?
So when we calculate the emissions for the wastewater treatment plant, you have different components. One component is the sludge. That's is very little in comparison to the operation of the wastewater treatment plant, which is what we are tackling here. And that's not just methane, but nitrous oxide. For those two emissions, the technology is not out there. I agree that for the sludge, that's an option, but that's very little in comparison of the total.
So what we've crystallised from that, if I'm hearing you correctly, I just want to make sure I understand the stuff. There are technologies available for the sludge. That's a relatively small portion of the emissions. The general emissions of the nitrous oxide and the methane come from the oxidation ponds. There's relatively few technologies for those. Got it right?
Yes. So at this stage, we're not confident enough in the technologies and the costs of the technologies to be able to set a target. But if that changes, then we could reconsider this.
Can I just further understand, and this is my line of questioning around the council emissions reduction target, and just see whether I've got this right. We've made this huge investment, and it is a very successful result that over the last 3 years, we've got our council emissions down from about 48,000 tonne down to about 8,000 tonne. And a key part of that, and the biggest single thing, has been the collecting of the landfill methane, which we are currently flaring. Now, can I just check in with you as to how this relates to the target? The next step with respect to the landfill is, rather than flaring that methane, is using it. And there's an active discussion going on about what deals we might do with the hospital for them to heat the hospital, or whether we take the CO2 out and sell that as a energy gas to barbecues or others, or whether we put it into a cogen plant and make electricity and sell it. In the event that we do find a use for the methane from either of those options, my understanding is that will make no reduction in our council emissions. It may contribute to community emissions. And do I understand that correctly? Because at the moment, even though we're flaring it, we're getting rid of the methane, we're producing CO2, but that CO2 would still be produced if we had a cogen plant at the hospital or we sold it as barbecue gas. So the further work we do at the landfill is not going to reduce council emissions. Our hope is that it'll contribute to our community emissions.
That's correct. And actually, that's why in the joint waste minimisation plan, there was included a target that any usage of that biogas ideally can replace other fossil fuels rather than create new initiatives, new activities.
I wish to do another accounting test on you, and this is about what's in the community target and what's in the council target. Let's say we put solar panels on one of our council facilities. Might be Trafalgar Centre, might be one of our libraries, and we generate solar electricity. How does that? We sold that electricity into the grid. When we put it into the grid, it's pretty hard to work out whether the electrons are going to heat Nikki's office or whether they're just going into the community. How would council investment in solar panels on one of our facilities contribute either to the council or to the community reduction in emissions?
So let's say we include many solar panels in our council facilities. That will increase the percentage of renewables in the grid if we inject that back to the grid. And that will change the emission factor for next year for every company that would like to report their emissions for electricity. That's in case that we inject it back to the grid. And then we'll displace any energy that we currently use for our grid. So any new activity won't be using an additional source of electricity that need to be generated.
Here's my challenge, is that when you put solar panels on a council facility and you put it into the grid, you've got no idea whether that electricity, it might be a beautiful sunny day and nobody's using electricity in Nelson and it goes across the hill to Marlborough to help process wine. We don't know. I'm just trying to understand better as to, into the targets on page 22 of the strategy, we're looking to reduce our energy and transport emissions by 650 tonne, I'm just understanding as to, well, how we're going to do that, and whether solar panels has been suggested as one of those possibles. I'm actually very confident and quite optimistic about the council targets. I'm more nervous about the others, but I still want to understand as to, yes, an investment in solar panels on council buildings would contribute to these proposed targets of a 650 tonne reduction in CO2 emissions from council energy and transport.
So let's say Trafalgar Hall spent 100 kilowatt hours of electricity per year.
Yep.
If you have solar panels, that expenditure will be 20 kilowatt hours because the rest will be produced by the solar panel. So you reduce the consumption, you reduce the footprint.
I put it quite pragmatically like this. Trafalgar, or let's take Civic House. We put solar panels on the roof and it generates enough electricity during the course of the whole year to meet all the needs of Civic House. But during the course of the year, there are some times when the suns aren't shining and we're buying power off the grid to keep ourselves and our staff warm. There are other times when we're exporting. Do we get to count, let's say, net over the year, we meet all our energy needs, even though we're trading during the course of the year? Do we get to say zero emissions for Civic House? Because net over the course of the year, we have completely met our energy needs from solar. Is that how it works?
That's not how it works, a carbon footprint.
Okay. Sorry. All right. Look, I understand enough, but I'm still, when we come to explore the action plan, I am going to need to get my head around how much an investment like solar would make a difference to these targets that we're proposing. Councillor Sanson.
In terms of the action plan, like all of these things, like potential solar panels and that kind of thing, that will be part of the long-term plan discussion. Unless an opportunity arises prior, it could be part of an annual plan discussion. Is that right? It's not something that we're going to be kind of interrogating either in this meeting or in the next meeting when we adopt. That's really the kind of strategy and the targets. Is that kind of how it's going to work?
Yeah, that's right.
The reason for my questions is not because I want to make those decisions now, Councillor Sanson. It's about understanding how realistic the targets are when we come to do that work. I'm going to take Councillor Courtney and then I'm going to take Councillor Benj.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Nick. Thank you, team, for the wonderful job you've done with both the strategy and the plan. I think it's something we can all feel proud of. But my question, there's a number going to come out here, I think. It's not our plan. It's the community's plan, isn't it? That's the first question. It's not our strategy, it's the community strategy. That's correct, is it?
Yeah, that's correct. It's the strategy is a community strategy. However, there are aspects of the strategy that will require council leadership to deliver on, and the council target is one aspect of that.
You see, what I want to be reassured of, that we don't lose sight of the fact that it is the whole of community approach. Because to be successful, it has to be a whole of community approach. And so in our rush to achieve our goals and fulfill our plans, the action plan, that we don't forget that we have to take the community on the journey. And they are still learning. In fact, we're all still learning. But you've got such a great strategy and plan here that in the excitement of the moment, I don't want to see some people left behind, because otherwise it won't be successful at all. So in here it says about community-led actions. We will explore opportunities to participate through democracy by engaging citizens directly in the decision-making processes. And that excited me. And in what way would you do that?
In what way?
Yes.
Is the question. Yeah, so just to touch on citizen assemblies and deliberative democracy. I provided a response to a question raised at the last hearing on this about whether that is a key part of our strategy. It is a key part of our strategy. It is important for empowering the community and educating the community on what we're doing. However, there are significant downsides like the costs and the time that it takes. And if the final decision isn't adopted by council, then it can kind of undermine the whole process. So, deliberative democracy certainly isn't the silver bullet for, getting everyone on board with climate action. It is definitely something we'll consider, and the types of processes that it could be good for are things like planning for climate change adaptation, and we're looking at options. We did consider that model for the wood engagement, but thought that it would be too kind of lengthy and costly, and preferred for the first approach to community-wide engagement, but it is something we could consider in future. Citizens' assemblies are particularly useful where there is a conversation that is highly values-based and controversial, and that we want to get really broad input into it. Yeah, but in terms of your, Councillor Courtney, your broader point about the importance of community involvement, one thing perhaps we haven't really highlighted so much in the report is the need for continued outreach and engagement that our team will lead to support the actions of others. So you're working with the Climate Change Forum and other organisations, and regularly kind of connecting with businesses to make sure that they're doing their part to deliver on the strategy. That will be a really key part of it, as well as looking at what we can do through the LTP, annual plan, etc.
That's very reassuring. Thank you very much.
Can I have Councillor Benge, then Councillor Stella?
Thank you, Mayor Nick.
It is my intention to try and do it with topics. So if a councillor does raise a topic and others want to feed into that topic, so that we can sort of work progressively through the various issues that are in the strategy. Councillor Benge.
I sit on this committee, and I don't think there's anything you can do about this, but I think about things a lot. And I think that we disregarded trees, and it's probably because you can't count them. We're into counting the effects that it does, but they're the only thing that turns CO2 into oxygen. And we've had a nationwide drive to make room for our rivers, because we need to. And I feel that there needs to be a similar thing about making room for our trees. And it saddens me the amount of trees we cut down in our city. We just keep cutting them down. The Bishopdale traffic lights, we cut down a whole lot of trees, some of them snow gums, which are quite rare. There was actually no need to cut them down. When initially I thought, we're going to put tar seal or something there, but we didn't. And it's really important around our rivers. So making room for our rivers should also include trees, because the ripple effect of trees, and I'm talking about trees, not scrub, is enormous. It's the difference between around our centre of New Zealand, if the river gets out of there and goes out through the wood, it'd be the difference between pushing a house off its foundations and the house being inundated in water, which could be the difference between a death and not. And I feel we just missed one on trees. And when it comes to review, it's something we should discuss. The other issue, Mayor Nick, is that I believe there's a ton of evidence that shows there's the technology for dealing with sewage. There is a huge amount of knowledge in dealing with sewage with etymological microbes. But to do it really well, it needs to start at the individual toilet in everybody's house. And to do that would be very cheap and very simple. And I've raised it in this committee. And I was told there was a staff member who had knowledge, but then I've been informed that I'm not allowed to talk to staff without Alec Laverdis being present. So, you know, I'm not sure, Mayor Nick, I think that you or the CEO are the only two people who would have the power to tag me with that. And I'd love to know which one of you it was and why. But I just, you cannot say that there is no technology or knowledge available for dealing with sewage. It is simply not true. There's just no will.
Well, on the issue of engagement with staff, the policy is very relaxed in respect of councillors being able to talk to staff about information. What becomes more difficult when those information requests form into directives. The second thing on the technical issue, I don't doubt that there are alternative ways of dealing with wastewater. I'm unconvinced, but would love to see any technology that by alternative mechanisms, either in toilets or all the way through the system, that those microbes don't still produce methane, and the methane and the nitrous oxide. In other words, even those home composting schemes that don't use water still produce methane and nitrous oxide. And I don't know whether our officers could provide Councillor Benj with additional information in that respect. More than have a discussion, but that's my understanding of the technology as it stands. More than happy for officers if you've got any further information in that area.
I wasn't trying to direct anybody, Mayor Nick.
Yeah, sure.
It was, I just can't even have the discussion. And I'm not sure why I'm tagged with.
I'm happy to facilitate that.
If I can't have a discussion.
But my understanding of the technology, and that's the key thing, is are there alternative ways of dealing with wastewater? Yes. Do those alternatives still do those still produce the methane and the nitrous oxide, which is the relevant discussion to this climate change? My answer to that is, and my understanding technically is yes. But look, I'm more than happy to facilitate the discussion with the council officer within our wastewater scheme to provide more information for you in that respect.
I'll just respond to the point on trees that Councillor Benj raised, if that's okay. So yeah, you're right. Trees are very important, and they're a big part of the strategy. So in the Thriving Biodiversity and Nature pillar, we've got a strategic area on afforestation, which says we will increase the scale of planting across Whakatū Nelson and invest in improving the health of existing forests. And then we've also recognised the importance of planting along waterways under the rivers and streams strategic area. We will protect and restore our waterways, such as through expanding floodplains and riparian planting. So yeah, even though you made the comment that we can't calculate the impact of every tree to our target easily, and because we've gone with a gross target rather than a net target, that doesn't actually contribute to our target. But we've clearly stated that this is an important area, and despite this, we will focus on tree planting.
Yes, and I just think it needs an emphasis. I mean, if you go to Oregon, there's whole suburbs where you can't see a house for the trees. Australia's the same. The Black Wombat Forest, there's a whole, I don't know how many, 50, 100 acres of housing. And if you stand on a rise, which isn't many rises in Australia, and look down over it, you can't see a single house. Lancefield's the same. They've simply built the houses in the forest. They haven't cut down the forest to build the houses to the extent you can't even see them. So we seem to have an aversion to trees. If we're going to do something, the first thing we do is get rid of the trees. And it used to be a complaint about developers, and developers would pay someone a couple of $100 to go in on a Sunday with the digger and just whack those trees over, will you? And then we'll say we're sorry. I think we got past that, but I don't think we've amended as the people in charge placed enough emphasis yet on the planting of, and by trees I mean trees. I don't mean undergrowth and something the size of a kowai and a cabbage tree. I mean trees.
I am interested in the point that Councillor Benj has raised in the narrative within the strategy. And can I just further your point for a moment, Councillor Benj, and test with officers? Under the emission targets, we set out quite specific targets what we're going to achieve in transport and energy and wastewater. And we have made plain, for good reason, and you argue it well, why we are taking a gross emissions approach. My question to pick up from Councillor Benja's point is this. Would it be possible under wastewater on page 22 of the strategy to make reference to the point that Councillor Benja raised around the council's forests and trees in a narrative sense? And I was thinking of something of the sort, and Councillor Benja, I'm just trying to pick it up and seeing how we can progress it, would be council will, in its management of its reserves and urban trees, work to increase the amount of carbon sequestration within its overall estate by improving forest health with the control of ungulates in its reserve areas and in managing its urban trees. So firstly, I'd like to test whether Councillor Benj, that would help at least mention the positive contribution that forests and trees make. And then I'd be interested in officers' view as to what would be the ups and downsides of including such a statement, not dissimilar to what we have around wastewater and waste in that section. Firstly, Councillor Benj.
Mayor Nick, I'm not saying, as it's been pointed out, that it was totally ignored, but I think a statement like that just puts it in your face and then you can't ignore it in the future. It's written there, and you know, you try and maintain what you got, but I think that's exactly the sort of response I was looking for the trees.
Do officers have a view about, does that undermine the overall strategy? I'm also interested, Aaron, in your view, because you're over the detail of this, as to your view, picking up on Councillor Benja's point about including something about the sequestration capacity of council's forest estate within our urban. So not changing the target, but just in the commentary putting something of that sort.
Open to that. I think, to my mind, it's covered by, we have those 8 pillars, and they kind of cover any kind of action we might want to consider. I think they're broad enough in scope. So I think under those, there's direction under those 8 pillars, especially the one about healthy nature and making sure nature is healthy enough to sequester carbon and store carbon and so on. But if you want more specific wording, that's fine. I mean, that could be done now, or it could just be done later when we're talking about actions and policies to meet the targets and goals. I don't feel
the only part I felt that Councillor Benj was making a point, Councillor Stallard, that goes further than the current strategy, is the comments that you'll refer to are in the generic sense rather than specifically related to council's work. The advantage of putting in that section is that council does own substantive forest estate and has substantial native reserves and manages urban trees. It's just to give it a bit more specific role for council. I'd be very interested in officers' view as to whether there's room to do such a thing, and where would be your view to try and pick up with Councillor Benja's concern into the strategy?
Mayor Nick, I think what Aaron has said is correct, and what's been said from the staff is correct. But it's a bit like Celia Lashley, who took, men need to be a good person. And she said, well, what does that mean? And so, it's a bit like that, as I see it, Aaron. Yes, it's covered, it's in there, but unless there's a statement like you have suggested, Nick, it doesn't focus on it at all. And if then a question is asked, if that tree I'm looking at over there happens to be in the road for somebody, it's like, oh, let's bowl it, But if there's a statement in there like that, it changes the attitude, and that's exactly what I felt was needed.
Here's the part that I'm interested in, is that when council comes to do its activity management plans and comes to implement, and let's say within our council department, we come up with an initiative that says, actually, if we spend 100 grand on controlling ungulates in our native forest, you could increase the amount of carbon sequestration by 10,000 tonne, and that is actually the best thing that we could do as our contribution, then if it's specifically mentioned, it's easier to do it and to steer that, yes, we are going to do that rather than solar panels or something else, where if it's not mentioned at all, I don't mind that it's not on the target, but I wouldn't mind to get some mention in there so that when we come to do those activity management plans, it is seen to be consistent with the strategy. That's sort of my view, but I'm happy to take others' views on the issue that Councillor Bench has raised. Any further perspective from officers?
I think that's a great suggestion. We can include another paragraph on page 22 under the council emissions reduction targets on trees. So even though it won't change the targets themselves, there'll still be a focus on that when council comes to make decisions.
And could I just ask that when you put that in and you come up with the wording, could you just talk with the council's parks and reserve staff and connect with the forestry team and try and get some words that are consistent with our overall direction? Yes. So I don't want to put something in there that causes them unease. If a council colleague's comfortable with something of that sort going into the commentary under the council emission reduction targets. Sure. Good. Okay, let's do that. Is that the remainder of your questions? And I'll come to Councillor Stella. Thanks, Councillor Bench. Thank you for that constructive alteration. Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Mayor Nick. Just wanting to explore one of the submitters at the hearing mentioned the possibility of a levy on airport passengers to raise funds to implement the climate change strategy. In the context of, I think, the aviation industry projects growth through to 2050, growth in passenger numbers, growth in emissions without any tech fix on the horizon in contrast to land transport. And staff have looked into that, and noting that Palmerston North Airport did have such a levy for the purpose of funding a new terminal. This was a few decades ago. So I do note the officer's advice that saying there's no provision that enables local authorities to directly impose a passenger levy. So let's say in that hypothetically TDC and NCC say, okay, we're the owners of the airport, we would actually like to do this to fund some activity of ours. From a legal perspective, what would happen? Would there be a block? Would something happen that says you simply can't do it? As opposed to there's not something that specifically says you can. And I know we're not lawyers here, so maybe we can't answer that. But is there clearly...
I think your question is probably as much to Nikki as it is to the climate change officials, because it's more broadly into what I think you're asking is if the council, through its statement of intent or its other tools, has it got some way that it could lawfully do that? So I'm happy for officers to answer, but it may be more appropriate for Nikki in her area.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question yet. It is a question of to what extent can we direct the airport to make changes, and that's a question from Nikki Harrison. Unless
if I could clarify, that's one aspect of it. Let's say everybody's in agreement. The airport, both councils, is there still a legislative barrier to doing it?
Big if, but a good question.
I don't think so. Feel free to comment, Sarah, but from the research we've done, the airport can, in consultation with the airlines, impose extra charges on departures and arrivals. And the question is to what extent we can direct the airport to do that or influence the airport.
Okay, acknowledge that, yes, the relationship between council and airport is one hurdle. And then I can understand the need, if we went to go in the route where it's built into the ticket price, then obviously that's one set of challenges or logistical considerations. If it was simply a machine in the terminal where you put in $20 and got a chit that you surrendered as you left, does that have the same hurdles? Or because you mentioned how that wouldn't be under the landing charge that the airport talks about with the airlines, then would it? That's in theory simpler.
Yeah, from the research that I did on that, that's exactly what Palmerston North did. There was a lot of public backlash against that extra step to you'd be boarding and then suddenly you realise that you had to go back and pay your $5 or $10 charge. And so their way around that was to then incorporate that fee into the landing charge so that it didn't become that onerous task for the passengers to do, as well as everything else at the airport.
That's a useful segue into my own question, and then I'll come to Councillor Sanson on the same issue.
Same issue.
Sure, shoot.
So just did a little bit of research into this, and I understand that the Christchurch Airport has a community fund, which is so it's not actually a levy on departing travellers, but they have it's used to I guess funds collected within the airport in wishing wells. So it's an optional donation, but it's used to fund local initiatives. So there is a kind of, I guess, an example of it already in place. And, you know, that is, I guess, something that we could potentially talk to the airport about, is encouraging travellers to make a contribution at the airport to fund local climate change initiatives. So it's Christchurch Airport Community Fund would be maybe worth us having a look at.
Just any further discussion on the airport. My understanding is that the airport landing charge is regulated by the Commerce Commission, and that they are able to increase that charge if they are doing capital investments in the form of a new terminal or runway extensions or apron upgrades. But they don't have the flexibility to be able to impose a climate change levy. Is that officer's understanding of the situation?
Based on what I did research on, yes. I think any of the income that's generated through levies goes back into infrastructure at the airport, unless, I suppose, if you had an agreement with the airport that would go towards some sort of climate related project.
Given that the airport emissions are about 25,000 tonne per year, and that the airlines are required to pay an ETS charge, which is currently at about $60, effectively every person who's travelling through the airport is effectively paying of the order of about $4 million per year in ETS climate changes. Is that your understanding of how that works?
I don't know the numbers, but yeah, I suspect those costs, the ETS charges, are passed on to the passengers.
So in a way, every passenger goes through the airport indirectly through their airport charge, through the airline, through the fuel they use, is indeed paying a climate change levy through the emissions trading scheme. Trudy?
Thanks. Sorry, I just want to come back. You said Palmerston North Airport about their, okay, because I used to go there quite a lot to go to Massey, so I paid it quite a bit. So they said it was because they had the designation as an international airport, and therefore the $5 departure tax that you paid was because of that designation. When they lost the designation or reduced the designation from to not be an international airport, they said that they removed that departure tax because they were no longer an international airport. But you said they've changed that and they've added it into the landing fees, or if I misunderstood you?
Yeah, that was in 2012. I don't know if there's anything that's changed since 2012 and if they've removed that. Yeah, so it went from being a separate departure $5 fee to being reduced to a $3 fee incorporated into the landing charges. But that was, back in 2012. So if something's changed since, I'm not aware.
Okay, so I just want to get it clear because you're using that as an example and I just wanted to make sure I had it right in my head. Thanks.
Just for the purposes of ensuring accurate information, to give the exact figures, which I've now got, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from fuel from the airport is 25,000 tonne per year. The current carbon price is $57. So the accurate figure, and I apologise particularly for the media, is that Nelson passengers are currently paying $1.43 million per year in emissions trading scheme costs. Councillor Stella?
And a follow-up, what is, in the past, I gather that ETS revenue did go towards climate actions. Is that still the case today or not?
That was the case under the previous government, but I think it's been reconsidered under the current government, and it's some of it is being used for other things that aren't climate change initiatives.
But given that Air New Zealand buys a substantive number of its carbon credits off the forestry sector, that indeed is climate reduction methods, i.e. I pay my ticket to Air New Zealand, they pay for a carbon credit, they buy the bulk of those carbon credits of those people that are planting trees, that indeed is sequestration of the emission that I paid for through my air ticket.
There's also the voluntary offsetting you can do when you buy a ticket fare. So that goes to the airline for things like tree planting initiatives. So there's a number of charges already built into the existing.
My understanding is that voluntary method is for international flights, which are not subject to the ETS.
No, it's for domestic flights as well.
Domestic as well.
I just paid for one.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, I pay every time, of course.
Councillor Sanson?
I think it would be really interesting to know whether Air New Zealand is actually offsetting any travellers' flights or whether they're just offsetting their own business operations, because I actually thought that the emissions from flights was voluntary, which is why they have that.
No, absolutely. I can assure the member that I wrote the legislation, and all domestic aviation fuel is covered by the ETS, and they have to buy a carbon unit under the emissions trading scheme for every one of those 25,000 tonne of emissions that come from the fuel used at Nelson Airport for aircraft. Quite confident of that bit. I'll go the Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Bench. We're still dealing with the aviation subject, got other subject areas to move into.
Not me then.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just say, Nick, I remember when I used to travel a lot paying this fee, and I'm sure there was one at Napier or Gisborne, and it wasn't very much, and I had no objection to paying it, but it was a real pain the way it was done, and that was my issue. Was that you travel around New Zealand, you land in airports, they're all the same, and then suddenly there's this extra thing that you can forget, and you get, and so if we ever go down that track, please make it simple. It wasn't the money, it was the inconvenience.
I'm sure, Councillor Benj, that those charges imposed by those regional airports was to offset the costs of upgrades of the airport facilities, as it was for Harps North Napier. The next topic I wish to go is quite a serious one, and look, I realise it's substantial. I remain, as I've expressed previously, very concerned about the attainability of the community targets. I note that on the earliest schedule, if we were to put initiatives into the annual plan, we might be able to do some things for the 26-27 year. And the first time we can do things with the LTP is in the 27-28 year. Now, as we've worded the options, and this is relevant whether we go with option A or option B, the target is expressed that we would reduce those emissions every year. Now, that means that when we adopt this target, in the first year, 25-26, we are seeking emission reductions of about 25,000 tonne. And I think there's a better chance of me getting to the moon. That is, I'll give you an example. The only way, if we just discuss the airport, is if we shut the airport. Nobody's contemplating that. But if you completely shut the airport, not just put a $10 charge on, that would reduce your emissions by 25,000 tonne. The proportion of electric vehicles that you would need to achieve in a single year is just astronomical. So my question for officials is, do we have any conceivable means of achieving that target in the first year? And if not, have we considered removing the words every year? That is, rather than making the targets either 6.8% or 8.3%, a target over the full 10-year period, being realistic, that the prospects of us being able to reduce emissions of the order of 25,000 tonne in the next year is very unlikely.
Yes, and this relates to a question that the Deputy Mayor raised at the oral hearing on the 21st of May. So at the moment it's expressed as an average of 6.83% or 8.3%. The intention is for this to be a total target over the period. So we need to work on the way that it's expressed in the final adoption report and what goes into the final strategy. But the intention is that we have our target across the whole period. We've set an average of per year so that we don't kind of delay until the last few years and then put all the heavy lifting in that period. So that is an intention, but we just need to work on how it is framed and expressed so that is clear, and that's what we're monitored on.
So am I to take from your answer to that question, the version of the strategy that I have in front of me under the two options uses this language: percentage reduction of all greenhouse gases, excluding the biogenic methane, every year between 25 and 2035. Is it intended to remove the words every year?
We may need to seek legal advice on this, just to be really clear on what we're expressing. But I think by the inclusion of an average of every year and by adding in this is equivalent to this total amount over the whole period, that will give us the flexibility that is required to meet the targets through a kind of varying pathway.
I don't want to be pedantic, but there is a significant difference between the words each and every.
Mm-hmm.
If you use the language each, an average of each year emissions reduction target of that says to me that I need to average the 6.8 or 8.3 per year. If I use the word every, that says to me that if we have not achieved a reduction of whether it be 6.8 or 8.3 in the first year, we're out. So is it officials' intention in the final strategy coming to council next month to use the language each or every? And I'm sorry to be pedantic, but I do think it's material.
Whatever word allows us to have the flexibility of that pathway. So if it's each, then we can revise it to each.
But what I don't want to be is in a position where the community says in 12 months' time, you didn't reach the target, you're a bunch of failures. I feel a lot more comfortable about the targets if it's an average over each year than the every year language is effectively what I'm wishing to signal. Councillor Stella?
Thanks, Minik. And continuing on that theme, if we didn't adopt either target, we would still have them because they've been adopted at the national level. So it's not so much, I think, we are pulling these out of thin air and adopting them for the region. We are aligning with the government and with businesses and so on, and they're not solely our responsibility. We'll be doing our part. And I guess if you looked at the ability of all those different actors to bring about reductions, you might say if we were aspiring to reduce by 6% a year, 4 or 5% might might be from central government measures. 0.5 might be industry, 0.5 might be, some kind of mix like that. So I think it's important that we do understand that we are adopting these potentially a target that aligns with the government, so you work together through everyone to achieve or move in the direction of that.
And the signal that I would wish to give is that I'm a lot more relaxed when we are using tougher language around council's emissions target, because we do have the levers and the powers at our hand to be able to meet those that are in the council emissions reduction target. I don't mind tough language there, but with respect to the community ones, I think we need to be more realistic about what levers we have access to. Okay, are there other questions we haven't covered, but can I take it that there has been a lack of questions from elected members, and it's not a criticism? Under section 5 of Officer's report, there's the series of 8 recommended refinements of the strategy in response to the submissions. I'm certainly in the headspace that I'm comfortable with those 8, but if council wish to question any of those 8 refinements, now is the appropriate time to raise it before we start considering the 5 specific recommendations that we put. So do any colleagues have concerns about the proposed changes recommended by officers with respect to the strategy that are listed there in response to the public submissions we received? Councillor Sanson?
I'm comfortable with them. I thought they were well explain.
I think they've done a good job of reflecting where there were specific issues that are raised. Are there any other issues that councillors wish to raise with officials, the Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, sorry, still a little range of questions from me. Just off the back of the discussion around targets, and maybe not for an answer now, but just in terms of the information presented, from my recollection at the briefing back in February on this, we sort of talked about once you get out past the horizon of the 2035 duration of what these targets are looking at, either one ends up in a similar place, and it is a question of how steeply or where the burden for steep reductions falls, either less steep but still quite dramatic earlier shifts, or later even more dramatic reductions to reach the same goal that's sort of inherent across both of these targets. And so just in that discussion around wording of average, does that shift the sort of underlying premise between those two target options? And yeah, just something I'm keen to get a bit more information on is really what we're trying to shape here is the long-term, is the shape of our line of reduction. Is do we do this or do we do this? And so more information on that would be useful.
I can answer that now. So if we go for option A, align with the government, we already have that pathway. So in the first period is 6.1% reduction, then it's 21, then it's 37. So it's more ambitious at the end.
Yes.
Option B is a linear reduction, so same every year.
Yeah, I guess my question is around if we're changing the wording to average reduction for that option B target, does that mean that option B can essentially be, like right now there's a kind of a clear distinction between them, but when is that average measured? If it's measured at the end, could it just be that we end up replicating option A and option B by pushing significant reductions at the end of it that then brings the average across all years to that 8.7%?
Yeah, and to clarify, for option A, the option you're talking about that's aligned with emissions budgets, it is intended to be a shallower pathway than a steeper pathway. So it is a bit confusing having an average of, and the intention was that that would be assessed at the end of the period. So that it would still would it be a linear pathway. And just to comment on whether they end up at the same point, there is a difference. So if you see on page 19 of the strategy, option B, the more ambitious option, does end up with more reductions at the end. So there is a slight difference.
Yeah, so it's really just around if we're making wording changes to make sure that we're preserving essentially the principle of the two options that was consulted on. A wider question, it's not, unless I've missed it, not particularly spoken to in the strategy itself, but I'm really interested in how we are determining the sort of accounting standards that we're using for calculating our emission reduction and our community emission reduction. And
so for community footprint, we use the Global Protocol for Cities, which is the usual standard available to calculate that. And for council footprint, we use ISO 14064.
And so does that fully cover things like how do we calculate the potential emission reduction of a landfill gas project? Does it provide that level of detail?
No, it provides the scope of your carbon footprint, indication of emission factors and consumption. For the wastewater treatment plant, for example, the standard provides some ideas and provide different data quality. So if you can have direct measurements, that would be ideal. But if you don't have that, you can do different methods. So the standard is very high level, and then you go to different data quality that you have.
I guess one of the things I'm particularly interested in regards to that is, especially when it comes to things like, biogas and the use of capture and use of methane, is there is very contentious and significant lobbying in multiple directions around how you should, especially for a project that is going to be using collected methane or landfill gas, as to how to account for the use of that. And depending on the methodology used, you can either come out with, a picture that says, oh, this is a fantastic project, or actually this is not a real emissions saving in any way. And so even just in terms of as those standards and as that space shifts, whether we have any sort of underlying principles for how we want to go about accounting for it.
So the emission factor is published every year by MFE. So there is not much room to move there. That's the emission factor that you use. For example, for the landfill, if you have a better quality emission factor that is specifically for your site, which is our case, then that's the preferred one. So there are different things that you can use, providing that your data is better quality.
I guess to give a sort of direct example would be, we've got in the long-term plan food waste collection scheme. At the same time, if we developed a on-site generator at the landfill, that we were going to take all of the gas that we've captured from that landfill, which we've massively improved our collection, and we're then going to be using it on-site to generate electricity. Does that then weaken the case for actually reducing at source through something like better collecting of food waste and not producing the methane in the first place?
So the methane, if in the landfill, let's say you use the methane to power vehicles, you will be replacing fossil fuel, and that will be a direct emissions reduction. When you report landfill gas, that's a biogenic emission, and there are rules how to report on that. It's mainly what is the activity that is using the landfill gas and which emission you are displacing. But there are methodologies, there are rules. There is not much room to account under in your benefit. And remember that we are also audited by a third party verifier. So all those emissions and the way that you report are being looked, and not only by the auditor, by the audit officer of general. Did I say it right? The officer.
And this is a super contested area. Even at the IPCC, there's significant disagreement. I guess what I'm looking for is assurance in terms of the principles laid out in the strategy, that we wouldn't end up in a situation where we are, because say we're harnessing that landfill gas to use it for something that is offsetting fossil fuel use, and so a reduction in our emissions profile, that we are then using that as justification for not reducing or stopping the production of the emissions themselves. Because you could easily completely undermine the sort of in terms of, from an accounting perspective, the carbon benefits of a food waste collection scheme, even if in terms of the real gain, that is the better way of at source reducing those emissions. And I think in terms of the principles outlined in the strategy, it's well addressed, but I'm just seeking assurance.
Yeah, I see what you mean. The best way to compare would be with a life cycle assessment. So then you can include the transport to collect emissions and take it to the landfill. And if you avoid that, yes, but you can compare that with a life cycle assessment.
And then just finally for me is how, and maybe it's a as much a question for Nikki as really around sort of the following the adoption of the strategy, the future integration with other strategies. You know, off the top of my head, I'd say something like the active transport strategy, which speaks to our previous council emission reduction targets and the nationwide emission reduction targets, is how this strategy is going to be speaking to the other existing and future strategies produced by this council. And just because, to maybe please Matthew, we did sign off at one point a draft urban greening strategy. Is it ever going to make its emboldened return?
Yes, through the mayor. I'm just trying to remember where the urban greening strategy actually is at. I would have to check.
The previous council signed it off, and it was meant to go out for consultation under this council. And
so it's in waiting.
It's never been across my desk
No.
in my time as mayor.
Let me hunt that out. But
that would be good for your health.
yeah, in answer to your wider question, we wouldn't have the capacity to go back and proactively change existing policies. But as they come up for review, then this strategy, we would make sure they were aligned with it. And it's easier when we're developing something completely new, because from the start, we will align it with what's in our climate change strategy.
Thank you. All from me.
Okay, I think we're nearing the end of the process. We've got the resolutions that are there. Is there any issues that officials require guidance on that the questions and discussion has not enabled you to be able to produce your report for the July meeting? Any topics that you required further guidance?
No, we've covered everything. Thank you.
The wording that we've gone through will be quite sensitive in assisting the council, so that when we come to make the decision about the community targets, we'll just need to be really clear for us. Is it expected that the strategy itself will be part of the council papers for July?
Yes, yeah. So we're planning to present the report recommending adoption of the strategy, and then the revised strategy will be attached to that.
Right. That'll be a little bit difficult in the sense that you'll still have the two option A and B, but just for councillors to be able to be very clear what's in option A and what's in option B will be quite important for council to be able to have a well-informed debate between those different targets when we come to the July 4th, is it?
July 3rd.
July 3rd. 3rd.
Yeah.
4th is, I've got July 4th in my mind for a different reason.
Have a resolution that says adopt the strategy subject to the decision on community targets, and then we'll have the wording, the proposed wording for each of the targets, so council can make a decision on one of the two.
Just the last point on that, for the debate, what will occur is, rather than having a debate to adopt option A and then people having to argue against it and for it to be defeated, for us to consider option B, the way I intend to facilitate the debate as the chair is to allow option A and B to be debated. You'll then be asked to vote either on option A or B, and then we will secondly resolve then to adopt the full document with which of those receives majority support. And the reason for favouring that approach is because there are really only the two options that have come through the strategy, and it doesn't give either option A or B the preference when we come to the debate of people having to argue against it. And it literally enables you and your contribution to be able to argue which those favour, but then will require, when we adopt the overall motion, which of those has the majority support. Okay, on that note, Aaron, would you be prepared to move the resolutions as the chair of the Climate Change Task Force? That's been moved by Councillor Stallard. Would Councillor Benge be prepared to second the adoption of those resolutions? We are going to have the opportunity at our July meeting to have a good, healthy debate. And today is just about finalising the deliberations and the guidance we need from officials. So unless somebody's desperate to have a debate, I'd like to put those resolutions. I'm sorry, Councillor Stallard.
Just 4 quick points that I think we should also have in our minds as we go forward. The first is the reason, I guess, we were discussing the airport levy is that for the strategy to be successfully implemented does require resourcing. And there are options, and other councils have taken different options. You might put something to general rates, have a targeted rate, as Auckland and Christchurch have done, or are there opportunities for some kind of apply the polluter pays principle, where we would generate income from flyers or drivers, acknowledging their benefits and negatives or risks to that. Benefits being it more closely people who are generating emissions are taking responsibility for them. Also, you don't have to increase rates potentially. The negatives are just legal or social barriers to acceptance to it and equity issues. But I think that's how we fund the implementation of the strategy. We should just keep that in our minds somewhat. Getting back to the two options or targets, another way of looking at them, the differences is that option A lags option B. Is fairly similar, but it just lags it by 2 or 3 years. So they're both heading in the same direction and they're never the same in any given year, but it's basically just lagging it. So it's not too different. More important in my mind, well, we will decide on a target, is the intent we take in with that. Are we going to be determined to put the work in, and do we have the intent to bring about the change and look really carefully at the way we do things so that we can actually move in the direction of those targets? And finally, just also acknowledging, touching on what something the Deputy mentioned, we have had with TDC, and this is a real opportunity, a joint transport emissions reduction target since 2021, and just that's currently, I believe, in the hands of the Joint Transport Committee. What will that look like going forward when each council individually or the climate team or has some ideas, bearing in mind that transport is the key area for this region, more so than TDC, where we will make emissions reductions? How do we, from the governance perspective and working together, put in the arrangements that allow for a harmonious and efficient way to look at transport emissions? That's something that we could give some thought to as well.
Thanks, Councillor Stello. Because he's given you a teaser on the debate that will occur in July, I will also give a teaser. The first is that there's a real, and it is a debate that we need to seriously consider, and that is, when do you shoot for the super ambitious, knowing that you don't have a hope of getting there? Is that a good thing from the point of view that it'll be a stretch target? And at what point does it go from being a stretch target to actually being dreaming and something you'll never achieve? As verse of setting a target that is more realistic. And I make no bones about the fact that New Zealand is littered with stories of councils setting very ambitious targets, never meeting them, but feeling really good about themselves because they set these very high stretch targets. And that will be the nature of the debate that we have at the next meeting, is just how far we stretch. I still have to say that when I look in the report that we've received today, and you look through the list of items that the community has suggested for reducing emissions, they fall miles short of what you would need to achieve a 25,000 tonne reduction in emissions. At our last meeting, when I asked the question, people said, well, you could put a $10 charge on airport for every passenger that goes through. The realistic question I'd ask councillors to reflect on as we go towards that debate at the next meeting is, even if you did that, what level of reductions would you see in people taking flights? My view is, even with a $10 charge, it might only be 1 or 2%. To achieve a 25,000 tonne reduction in emissions, you need to effectively reduce zero emissions from the airport. Close it. The airport's transport emissions are 25,000 tonne a year, and you have to do that every year. And so the reason I will be arguing on the 3rd of July that to set the more ambitious target is setting a council up to fail. And that is the story of climate change since all of the time that I've been involved in. And the last piece I'd say is there's lessons for us in what happened over Plan Change 29. When we did the urban development strategy in the previous council, at the high level strategy, everybody was in favour of very high intensification. But when you told them the detail of what it meant in their neighbourhood, we had huge pushback. We have exactly the same risks with respect to this climate change strategy, in that we all sign up to these very bold targets without telling them honestly what is the extent of the measures of the things that they have to do, and that to set those very high targets, it is absolutely radical revolution for our community, and we set ourselves up to fail. Now, that's an important discussion for us to have at the next meeting. It is about us making judgments about, like, say, what's the stretch target that we want to do. Actually, myself and Councillor Stallard share a great deal of views about climate change, and we should not allow the differences over the target that we are going to have a constructive and robust discussion about to take away from the consensus view, and that is that we want to set a strategy and we want to have an action plan. But I am confident that we can have a mature and respectful debate about those different targets, knowing that actually there's a very large amount in the strategy that we agree upon. But that will be the nature of the healthy debate that we have at our July meeting. Councillor Sansom.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, just briefly from me, thanks again to the climate change team, and everybody who's submitted, and particularly to people who've really taken to heart the need for us to consider how we can reduce emissions in our community and present a whole lot of ideas. And I acknowledge Lindsay Wood, who sent a very informative document earlier this week with a whole lot of suggestions. I think we need to really consider the language we're using. We have heard from our experienced, our expert climate change team that both of these targets are in alignment with the government, legislation or the climate change emissions reduction budget. So I think we need to kind of consider not using wording like radical and extreme and that kind of thing, because they're both headed in the same direction. They both actually get to the same point with just a few years between them. So it's not such a great gulf between the two targets. I think I also take comfort in the fact that it's not just us, it's not just council's responsibility, it's not just the community's responsibility, it's also a government responsibility. And central government has the opportunity to pull significant levers that could have quite an impact on our emissions reduction target or outputs in our region. For example, things like clean car discounts, which can encourage quite a shift in people moving to electric vehicles. Things like investment into alternative aviation fuels, which, if that moves the dial on aviation fuels, could represent significant emissions reduction. There's numerous other things, investment into cleaner technologies. And I think also it's really important to remember that these things aren't always a cost to the community. My son has chosen not to buy a car. He gets around by bus. He's saving thousands of dollars a year, which he's able to put towards his living costs, probably saving for, eventually one day maybe some kind of affordable housing. So, we have to remember not to frame these things always as a cost to the community, that they can actually be a cost savings and a benefit to all of us. Thanks.
Councillor Anderson, then the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, we'll land somewhere I won't debate. I'm on the board at Culture Conversations, and the team, they did so many engagement sessions there. So I was at a lot, and they were packed out. So it was amazing. And I'm a big fan. And when I see you guys sitting there as a team, I know you've got each other's back, and it was such great engagement. And I think there's a lot of learnings we could do as far as how we take the community on our journey. And I just wanted to tell you, you guys are awesome. And I was thinking gangsters, sitting there. Yeah. So yeah.
Who were the gangsters?
Yeah, I know. I shouldn't really say it the next meal. I wanted to get off my chest now. So well done.
Thanks, Councillor. The Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Bench.
Yeah, we're just doing tasters, so big thank you to the climate change team for all of the work you've put in, but also to the community who have fed in and shaped where we're landing with this strategy. Just briefly in terms of the whole cost discussion, we don't have free dental care in this country yet. And I often have to weigh up that question of well, I could go to the dentist. It'll cost a pretty penny. Or I could just wait and see. The consequences of waiting and seeing will almost always guarantee that I pay significantly more. And when we're talking about this, we can't just look at what is the cost now. We have to ask ourselves the question of what is the cost of 2 degrees, of 3 degrees of warming? What is the cost if we don't meet the 1.5 degree target? We've seen what those costs can look like in both the incredibly significant and devastating impacts the August 22 floods had, both on this community and on the basic work program of this council. Our focus immediately had to pivot, and it's been a dominating force for 3 years. Now imagine that the likelihood of that occurring is quadrupling, or is exponentially greater. Imagine that we hit a point where the effects of climate change we can't even begin to imagine, that the circulatory systems in our ocean fail, that we see the death of our coral reefs and ecosystems for a city and a community that's economy relies significantly on things like fishing and aquaculture, but also on viticulture and horticulture, on tourism, on the ability to present a natural world that we want to engage in and love. The consequences will be incredibly costly and drastic. And actually, those are things that we have done the work and done the numbers on. But even that is just our best guess, because the truth is we don't know. And I think that we should be doing everything that we can to not find out.
Councillor Benj.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. And thank you, Deputy Mayor, for reminding me what I'm doing with my teeth right now. I just want to say, Nick, about your concern about achieving the goals and that we set them too high. I've been around a very long time and involved in an awful lot of innovation. And anyone who has doubts about achieving something is always correct. And those who do achieve great things never have any doubt in their mind that they can do it. So, you know, it's a question of conviction, really. So I don't think we should be ashamed of having a target that is great.
Thank you. That's all the contributions. Put the resolutions 1 to 5 that have been moved by Councillor Stallard and seconded by Councillor Benj. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, say no. Can I just clarify one other point with respect to the debate that will occur? Because we're going to have option A and option B debated, it is not my intention to make provision for a right of reply. That is that each member will have the opportunity to make one contribution of 5 minutes as to whether they favour A or B. Then we will have a mover for the substantive motion to adopt the strategy, and there will be a right of reply on the person who moves the substantive motion. Is there any objection to that procedure being adopted? That being the case, that's how we will do things on the 3rd.
Point of clarification, and that will apply to all elected members.
Correct, including myself. Yeah. What I would.
Was trying to be elected.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Oh, you are so diplomatic, Councillor Sand. What I thought would not be fair would be for when you've got an option A and an option B, would be for someone to move and effectively have 2 5-minute slots, where the intention is that everybody will have a 5-minute slot, including the chair, in whatever order is chosen, that there will be a vote on the option A or B. And then when we come to a mover of the total strategy, we'll have an initial debate on options A or B. And then we'll have a second debate, which there will be a mover and seconder for. And I'm making the assumption that when the strategy will be adopted, it would be normal for the chair of the task force to move that. And during that part, Aaron, you'll have right both to move and to have a contribution and to have a right of reply on the second debate, which is on the adoption of the overall strategy. I think that'd be the fairest way in which to conduct our conclusion of this piece of work. That being the case, we conclude the council meeting with a karakia, but can I just keep councillors' attention? There is a further matter after the karakia I want to discuss. Tuia Tauranga, Tuia Kararo, Tuia Kawaho, Tuia Kiroto, Tuia Tihi Tangata, Karonga Te Pau, Karonga Te Ao, Humiai Huiai, Tahi Kiai. Can I ask for elected members' indulgence? An urgent matter has come up that I just